Right. Thank you so much, Paul, and thanks, Nick and Roger, for inviting me. I think uh, this the last few sessions have been very intriguing and inspiring, in fact. So, what I'll be doing is I'll be taking you through Electronic City, suburb in Bangalore. Uh, it's sort of on the southeast part of the city there on the screen, and this is how it looks like now on the recent satellite image there. But this is all more recent in the last 40 years or so. But to put things in context, I think I want to take you through an historical map of Bangalore. This is about from 1920s, where you see in the red are the older part of the city, and where Electronic City has really come up is essentially, uh, if you see my mouse pointer, there is this village called Konapa Grahara, and that is where Electronic City has come. It seems to be nondescript village in the southern southeastern part of the city expanse. But surprisingly, it also turns out that we have sort of a stone inscription that was found very close to where this Electronic City is in this village called Begur, that has the earliest reference of the city of Bangalore, dating back to 9th century. So the rural hinterland that was seemingly beyond the city doesn't seem to, or seems to have some sort of a connections that are there, or rather that existed earlier. And this is the revenue map of the Konapa Agrahara, which has been eventually taken over by the current Electronic City, so to say. And this is in like part of the Bangalore South Taluk as per the revenue. So the history goes back to 1978 here, not much like many of the cities that we've seen there in the but here it so happened that in Rakesh Manila, who is the chairperson and managing director of Karnataka State Electronics Development Corporation, seemed to initiate this proposal for establishing Electronic City. And initially it was proposed to be for about 300 acres. And today, in more than 3 phases, it is now almost 900 acres. This was the proposed layout plan in 1979. It turned out that government of Karnataka already had about 210 acres of land under its jurisdiction, and it only had to acquire about 90 acres from uh, private developers, or sorry, the local residents or native owners of the land there. And thanks to sort of a very powerful law that we have under the Karnataka Industrial Area Development Board Act, government of Karnataka managed to acquire all of those lands therein. And as you see today, we have all the key software majors like the Infosys, Wipro, Tech Mahindra, Siemens, Hewlett Packard, Tata Consultancy, and host of them. And there are like more than about 160 such companies that have are working out of Electronic City today. And then we also have institutions like the International Institute for Information Technology, the National Nellore Technical Training Federation's Technical Institute, and the Symbiosis Institute of Business Management as well. So there has been the entire locality has been now part of the new emerged industrial township. So very interestingly, what has happened is, if you saw the earlier village map, then what was once part of Konapa Agrahara village, and hence the village Gram Panchayat, as it was called locally, it has now been since taken over by Kionics. So the kind of management and everything rested with the Kionics until 1997. And during 1997, all the industries came together and formed what is called as Electronic City Industries Association. And then Kionics handed over all the management of the Electronic City area to LCA. And interestingly, in 2012, uh, the BBMP, which is the Greater Bangalore City Corporation, uh, uh, whose limits were not really up to extending up to where Electronic City is as it stands today, still wanted to kind of expand its jurisdiction into Electronic City. So they passed a resolution in the council, and however, I think LCR strongly objected it. And they somehow managed to get the state government to pass on a different notification, which constituted the Electronic City Industrial Township Authority. So under the Karnataka Municipalities Act, they kind of created a new entity that could kind of come in as an industrial township authority. So LCR transformed into LCITA as it is now. So that is now kind of taking over and managing the facilities or everything around that, including collection of property tax and host of things. So as it stands today, LCITA now looks through from providing like occupancy certificates to managing solid waste to collecting property tax and host of all of those things that one would think of as a typical function or in of an urban entity or a local body, so to say. So essentially, LCITA has transformed into a sort of semi local body there. But interestingly, unlike how we would have residents who would elect representatives and then govern the local body, we have representatives from the industry who are part of the LCITA committee. And there is only one person from the neighboring Raman Panchayati or the village panchayat who happens to be part of the LCITA committee. So essentially, it is like it's part of the industries association who's still running it in that sense. Interestingly, in Karnataka for land use planning and all the master planning, Government of Karnataka has a different act called the Karnataka Town and Country Planning Act, and also has created different entities or parastatal organizations that will that takes up planning. So on that context, it has notified Bangalore Development Authority, which has this like part of the, so this jurisdiction is part of the Bangalore metropolitan area. Although if you note that I did mention that it is not part of the Greater Bangalore City Corporation limits, but strangely, this is part of the Bangalore Development Authority limits. And so this was part of the master plan exercises that happened in 2015. This is the planning district where Electronic City falls in. Let me zoom in a bit. So this is where you see the Electronic City. And then to give you quick things on that, purple is where all industrial activity is supposed to be, and all are primarily industrial area. Yellow is where residences are permitted. Red are public uses and other government offices, and green or other green spaces. So again, as it stands today, after the revised master plan of 2015, now there is a new draft master plan for 2031 that has been prepared, that is still pending approval by the state government. And so this is how the new master plan looks like. The only new thing is that in the periphery, they have now opened up and marked a whole set of residential areas that can come up. So there is an overlapping jurisdiction that happens here, because largely what you see in purple are what is under LCITA, and what you see that are in yellow are part of that or below or governed by the neighboring gram panchayats. So there is also a sort of tensions that I will speak about a little later. So when it comes to housing, so to say, in the original imagination, the Bangalore Development Authority was supposed to have develop houses in the locality. But unfortunately, as it has transpired, or rather tragically, I think BDA never did that. And so in the core part of the industrial township, there is hardly any residential localities. So that really strikes in the sense that for an industrial township that is almost housing close to 1 million workforce, lacks housing within that locality, but most of them do commute elsewhere. There are a few who reside in the neighboring areas, and there's also a whole bunch of support staff who sort of live in the neighboring sort of urban villages that have become to now. So as a consequence, a significant majority commute to the city on the famous Hosur Road and pass through the Silkport Junction. I'll come to a Silkport Junction in a bit. And but what is interesting is that while we are looking at in the context of peripheral centralities, the way how Electronic City has emerged as a key only in industrial township without residents being there, it has prompted residents to actually move across the periphery of the existing Electronic City Township Authority area and into the neighboring villages. So it's kind of an emerging spatial manifestation that is really emerging. And with respect to water supply, since the Electronic City doesn't really fall under the Bangalore City Corporation limits, so the water supply, they don't qualify to get water supply that the city gets through the river Kaveri, again, pumping across over 100 kilometers there. But so what has been proposed is to draw underground groundwater resources itself, and that continues till date. Perhaps since the nature of industries and lack of housing also has resulted in reduced demand of water supply, and how one would envision in a typical case. So since we all saw that, since we don't have housing, so to say, there, and a very significant majority commute, in the original plan, it was thought of that the State Road Transport Corporation will run buses there. And currently it is the city, the Bangalore Metropolitan Transport Company, which operates buses as a public transport system service there, runs buses to different destinations from Electronic City. And a traffic study by LCTA alone claimed that during peak hours itself, they cumulatively manage close to 50 to 60,000 vehicles. And since the majority of them commute, so there has been always contested issues on mobility and access to better transportation services and so on. This has been there for a while, and early 2000s itself, this prompted some of the industry captains, including Mr. Narayan Murthy and Mr. Nandan Nilekani and a few others, raising their concerns to the state government and the state actually constructing an elevated 4-lane elevated highway that could take for almost 10 kilometers from the outer ring road to the almost the periphery of the Electronic City, as in the entrance of the Electronic City there. And now, as it stands, there is also a new metro rail connectivity that is being planned so that people can commute to Electronic City through the metro rail. Interesting thing is that we have this sort of infamous Silkport Junction, which is basically as you exit from Electronic City and take on the elevated highway, you can exit or get into the city through even has to get through the Silkport Junction. And we've got numerous memes that have come up for on the traffic situation in Electronic City on Silkport as you exit from Electronic City. Some of them are I'll just read out a couple of them, say divided by TCS, Infosys, Wipro, and Accenture, but united at Silkport. And there's also a meme on Tesla's autopilot that goes on Bangalore crossing Silkport, and this famous Indian film actress saying, I just want to go home types in the sense. So the kind of things that you see is also in a way hilarious and or sort of the sorry state of affairs. In fact, some of the Kannada film theater artists also came up with a short movie, which also incidentally won several awards on Silkport, saying how this is a traffic love story that was conceptualized in a 10-minute short movie. So there's a lot of things that has already sort of emerged out of that. But I guess a crucial question there is, I think, who is the citizen here, in the sense those who just come and work here and live back, and where are the locals? So interestingly, though the locals are who are in the periphery are those with some skills get to so take up some employment in the electronic city area, but largely I guess I see that they're being driven away. But I think I see that the larger issues there are that how electronic city itself. The industrial township authority now has really come forward and sort of looking at it in a very sort of transactional way. In the sense, I think it has been brutal in many ways. Primarily because it is now looking at everything in a more physical sense than having people around it. Uh, and incidentally, LCTA management are all the employees or senior officials of the industries who are working there. And there is, like I said, there is a nominally a Gram Panchayat member on the board, but they hardly make any sort of a difference. So in the sense, if you sort of look at sense of citizenship there and who really belongs to electronic city, I think the larger questions uh, sort of emerge there. And as recent as like a couple of months ago, in the neighboring Gram Panchayat, so the residents sort of had a protest and wanted to be part of the city corporation. But LCTA, as it stands, has been vocally very against the whole idea of getting back into the city corporation. Now, the key thing is that, like, the physical manifestations that you see at electronic cities, look at like something like 100,000 feet above, looks like a model organization structure with sort of very efficient ways of, managing services and a host of things in the township area there, industrial township authority area there of about 900 acres. But if you look at the way it has really transformed, is we seem to have the sort of tenets of the new public management that has sort of seeped through, and how one could really look at as it has resulted in corporatized sort of way of public services delivery, which I think is would sort of again borrowing on the concepts that came yesterday or and has been reflecting is I think could we call it as brutalism in that sense. If you see the news report on the right side, I think one of the advisors is saying that like really they're not concerned of sort of suggests that they're not really concerned of the residents beyond the township authority, even post-COVID situations and things like that. So bringing back, I guess, I think the larger questions of how the spatial manifestations and the physical manifestations has also now emerged into offering different social and political contexts here. And that's where I guess looking at in terms of where electronic city itself as emerging as a peripheral centrality there, but there are other manifestations that are really arising, and I think these are interesting things to look at and how they will manifest out in the days to come. Yes, with this I'll stop here and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sudhira. Very interesting. At the start I was kind of imagining, was this kind of like a Silicon Valley type kind of space in some senses, and it's kind of what it might be emblematic of in some ways. But interesting to see the kind of the scale that Electronic City is kind of contextualized within as well. So thank you very much for that. And I think a good turn there on the notion of the kind of the brutalness and the brutal scape about it, about the transactionality. So not so much about the morphology, but I suppose the relationship that Electronic City has with its citizens and the wider spatiality that it's set within as well. So thanks for that. So if you can stop sharing your screen, then I'll be able to see everybody else, and then we can see if there's some questions on the go. Oh, and I see Yep. Okay. Nick has a virtual hand up. So Nick, I'll defer to you.
Hi, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Sudhira, for excellent talk. I have to confess a little bit of a kind of superficial kind of bypasser interest here, because I did visit Bengaluru and do some interviews out in a separate sort of high-tech suburban area, Whitefield. And part of the reason also for contacting you to hear a bit more about Electronic City is they seem to be these sort of contrasting places, you know, like I say, superficially, you know, looking around Electronic City, this sort of, you know, sort of slightly grand vision of industrialization with a kind of common thread running through it, common sort of branding and livery and street design and planning, compared to Whitefield, which is a series of individual corporate campuses. So really interesting that the end point you arrived at was that actually Electronic City doesn't sound that inclusive or associative, perhaps for the industries involved, but not for the citizens. So I wonder whether it was any more brutal than the Whitefield kind of pattern of industrialization. So you've got the kind of associative kind of city-ness, although it's very limited in Electronic City, and then you've got this sort of series of enclaves, corporate campuses over, you know, in Whitefield. I wonder whether you had any sort of judgment to make about either of those two places.
Yeah, I guess in a way, I think in terms of analysis, Electronic City offers a different view because it has an industrial township authority, unlike Whitefield. Now, something that I didn't touch upon here was I was trying to also look through the property taxes, as in who's paying where types. So if you start looking through those lenses there again, Electronic City Industrial Township Authority retains property tax up to 30% there, and rather only 30% of the property tax is paid to the Gram Panchayats, and the rest is retained by the Township Authority, which means the Gram Panchayats literally get peanuts, as in like for the kind of industrial activity that they do and the kind of property tax that they could actually generate as revenues to the village panchayats there. They seem to be losing out there. But on the contrary, Whitefield now, at least a significant part of it is now part of the city corporation, and which means that it is now governed there. So thankfully, in a way, I think it doesn't have this industrial township authority. I would rather think that although you have large campuses on their own and all of it, end of the day, they have a local elected body, and the taxes are paid through the local body therein. And so the governance is sort of they held their local representative more responsible or accountable in that sense. So here, if you see the tensions there, LCTA seems to be like we are only bothered about within this township authority area, as in this is where it is, and beyond which this doesn't seem to be any sort of the human connection there, so to say. So yeah, I guess that's where I also came across this literature on the new public management that has been seeped through in governance and largely in Karnataka, where the corporatized of public service delivery is kind of very scary, because you're doing away with a lot of what we would otherwise think in a proper democracy, that you would envisage more participatory representation and involvement in local governance. That seems to be sort of taken away in this case. Yeah.
I'm going to raise
another one. Okay, Nick. Okay,
yeah,
fine.
Well, there's a virtual hand and a real hand. Well, they're both virtual hands, really, to everyone else. But I was just going to follow up a little bit on that, because I think the way you explain the trajectory of Electronic City is, a sort of institutional evolution to becoming perhaps more autonomous. Yeah. And I just wondered whether you want to speculate on, okay, in some ways, LCTA is not that bothered about some of the surrounding residents, and it's concerned very much about its boundaries. But does it have do you think it has the interest, the scope, the resources to annex and become a bigger, effectively suburban city authority? Is that likely? Is it on the agenda? Do you think it would happen?
Unlikely, as in, I think, although even if the LCTA governance committee would think of such sort of possibility, I very much doubt if that will happen, because the neighboring villages and all have now been there has also been a lot of real estate development that has emerged in the periphery beyond the electronic city and adjoining areas. So there are a whole lot of other private developers who are in the game now. That is one. And having said that, I think the failed attempt in 2013, when the city corporation wanted to sort of annex the electronic city, has resurfaced again with a host of other gram panchayat or village panchayats around electronic city voicing that they would really want this to be part of the city corporation. So very unlikely that LCTA will now can think of acquiring or going beyond their current jurisdictions.